The British government carted away thousands of documents and hid them in London in a bid to cover up and/or destroy evidence to conceal truth on atrocities the colonial government meted out against Mau Mau freedom fighters in the run-up to Kenya's hard-fought independence. In an exclusive interview with NTV, Professor Caroline Elkins, who authored the award-winning book titled Imperial Reckoning, The Untold Story of Britain's Gulag in Kenya, whose research work was used as evidence during the historic Mau Mau court case in London against the British government. Thousands of Mau Mau supporters were killed in various detention camps that were a top secret until she blew the cover, as Duncan Khaemba now reports.
On 6th June 2013, a high court in London delivered a landmark ruling in a historic class action suit that had been filed by a section of victims of British colonial torture during the Mau Mau rebellion in the 1950s. Survivors who successfully sued the UK government, compelling London to admit and pay compensation for all the atrocities committed against Kenyans who agitated for independence. It was a precedent-setting case for colonial accountability in spite of UK's initial denial of responsibility.
When the case was filed in 2009, in the legal circles in the UK, it was called the no-hoper. It didn't stand a chance. Nobody in the legal circles thought this case had a chance.
The prosecution relied heavily on Professor Caroline Elkins' research in nailing the case after 5 claimants used her book titled Imperial Reckoning, The Untold Story of Britain's Gulag in Kenya, becoming the basis for the first time for the British government to be sued by a former colonized population.
5 incredibly brave Wazee who had either endured horrific torture in the camps or in the villages were willing to come forward as test claimants in suing the British government. And it was in the context of that case and document discovery that we found out the British government had stolen thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of documents at the time of decolonization and brought them home to Britain and hidden them. At that point, nobody really talked about or had thought about these detention camps of sites of massive systematized violence. So much so that fast forward 25 years later, the British government's apologizing for this. At this point, it didn't happen. So they're trying to keep the history contained.
Elkins' book, which won a Pulitzer Prize in 2006 for non-fiction and selected as Book of the Year by The Economist, laid bare explicitly the inhumane treatment freedom fighters faced at the hands of Terence Gallagher, who was a British colonial senior officer in charge of detention during the state of emergency era, presiding over the Larry massacre in March 1953 and the month-long Operation Anvil from 24th April to 26th May 1954. in an attempt to remove suspected Mau Mau from Nairobi. She says it was horrendous.
In response to Mau Mau, the British government detains nearly 1.5 million suspected Mau Mau adherents, either in a detention camp or in an emergency village, and torture thousands of them, murder thousands of others, and force them to labor. Today, if you land at Jomo Kenyatta Airport, that tarmac was constructed by detainee labor. So much of Kenya's infrastructure was constructed during this period of time by forced labor from detainees.
The book saw Caroline Elkins featured in the BBC documentary Kenya White Terror and won International Red Cross Award at the Monte Carlo's Film Festival, which was the basis for the Mau Mau reparations 2009-2013 case, leaving the UK government with no choice but apologize and pay £20 million settlement.
Understand and try to put yourself in the shoes of what it means for a detainee to experience the kind of horror they experienced, right? So, everywhere from castration was widespread, sodomy with broken bottles, vermin, the lopping off of breasts, the use of all kinds of pliers, horrific kinds of rapes, sodomy, as I said, electrocution torture. They would tie detainees to the back of a Jeep and make them run behind until the Jeep went so fast that they were left in bits and pieces. I mean, things that you can't imagine. And I think one of the things that affects you the most when you listen to this is the pain that people are feeling decades later. And the pain was so raw. When individuals cry and they make not a sound, the tears just come like that. I experience that so often when people are speaking to me, that the rawness of that and what happened to them and the things that they had kept inside of them for decades on end. It affects not just individuals, but it affects entire communities and the nation itself. A nation born of this kind of violence, and then it's all swept up under the rug and people said it didn't happen. So I think it's extraordinary, and my wish is that for young Kenyans to know what happened at the birth of their nation, what was the sacrifices that were made.
Duncan Haemba for NTV.
Some of them coming from the chiefly community.